The manager who courted me to work at ANZ did a great job. There were even gifts for my unborn child. And it's actually a tribute to both the ANZ and Fonterra that both of those large organisations saw fit to court a woman on maternity leave. I think they saw that someone who comes and starts a job at a new place with a commitment to it will do a good job. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for making time to be here today. I am proud of the budget that we announced yesterday. Delivering the budget is an enormous privilege, and it provides a rare opportunity to help shape New Zealand for the better. And I believe that the decisions that we announced yesterday will have ramifications for years to come, just as the decisions by former finance ministers, good and bad, have helped to shape the New Zealand we live in today. And proud though I am of this budget, I'm not going to today subject you to a recitation of the budget numbers, although if you're interested, there is extra for experts on the Treasury website, and I recommend that you pay it a visit. My children assure me, having listened to my budget speech yesterday, that Obergal is not as interesting as I think it is. But look, New Zealand has one of the most thorough budget processes anywhere in the world. And so what I'm going to do today is give you a flavour of the deliberations that informed our government's budget decision-making, and I will highlight a few of the features. Our coalition is ambitious for New Zealand. We have to be considered and deliberate about the way that we deploy the resources that New Zealanders have entrusted us. Because as I said in my budget speech yesterday, the true measure of success is whether government is making a positive difference to the lives of New Zealanders and their families, not actually how many times it claims to care, nor how much it spends. Because a dollar squandered on a well-intentioned but poorly thought-out initiative is a dollar that is not available to put towards the cost of an operation, an extra teacher or police officer, or a return to the pocket of a New Zealander who earned that dollar. And the billions of dollars frittered away by the previous government are billions of dollars that are now not available to fund life-saving drugs, train more teachers and build hospitals. And worse, it is billions of dollars that we have to repay, and until we do so, to pay interest on. So you can probably discern my opinion of the previous government's management of the government finances, and I won't dwell on it here. But context does matter. When I hear commentators and interest groups say we should be doing more to address disadvantage, to support business, to improve healthcare, and raise educational achievement, I agree with them. We should, and we are. And that is why Budget 2024 invests significant extra resources in health, education, law and order, and it is why we are shifting resources very deliberately from the back office to the front line across the whole of the public service. And this also requires us to fill funding holes left by the previous government, most notably its failure to make provision for the ongoing funding of pharmac medicines. We knew from publicly available documents when we came into office that we were going to have to find $700 million over the next 4 years to fund a shortfall created by the previous government, who only funded a bunch of medicines until 30 June this year. What we didn't know was that continuing to fund medicines that New Zealanders rely on was actually going to cost an additional $1 billion on top of that. And at the same time that Treasury advised me of that $1.8 billion shortfall, it also advised me of 20 other significant fiscal cliffs. And these things all add up, which means that we can't do as much as we would like to as quickly as we can. And you don't need me to tell you that all of this is occurring in the context of a significantly challenging downturn for New Zealand. we suffered an acute cost of living crisis in 2022 and 2023. The Reserve Bank responded by raising interest rates sharply. The official cash rate went from 0.25% to 5.5%, and it's remained there for a year. That hurts. And I get regular updates from the Treasury about the state of the economy, and what's apparent now, compared to 6 months ago, is that the current downturn started earlier, has been deeper, and is expected to last for longer than previously thought. And so in this environment, in this context, I really feel for families and businesses across the country who I know are doing it tough. So the good news out of all of that context is that there are better times ahead. The economy is robust and it is recovering. Forecasts in the budget update we released yesterday indicate that current weak demand in the economy is reducing inflation pressures, leading in time to a gradual easing of interest rates. And as interest rates ease, economic activity is forecast to pick up over the second half of this year and to continue growing in 2025. The forecasts released by Treasury yesterday show an improving outlook for the economy. Inflation coming under control, interest rates dropping, growth recovering. And so the government's job is to help that recovery, not hinder it. So how does the budget help, and how will it help you weather the downturn? Well, Budget 2024 delivers fiscal discipline to get back to surplus and lower debt. It delivers infrastructure investments for growth. It delivers savings across government to responsibly fund tax relief and boost frontline services. It delivers tax relief and targeted investments in public services. And it does all of these things in a fiscally responsible way. Many of you will have heard in the past couple of days the term operating allowance bandied about in advance of the budget. Well, the operating allowance is the amount allocated for new initiatives in the budget. And in real terms, the operating allowance for this year's budget of $3.2 billion is the lowest since Budget 2017. The allowances we have set for budgets 2025 through to 2027 are lower still at $2.4 billion. By comparison, the final operating allowances for the last two Labour budgets were $5.9 billion in Budget 22 and $4.8 billion in Budget 23. Make no mistake, ours is a fiscally disciplined government, and these lower operating allowances are essential for getting the government's books back in order. The government has been spending more than it receives since the 2019-2020 year. The Treasury has identified this as a structural deficit. That means that as a country we are borrowing to pay for the groceries. And after stripping out large one-off expenses and adjusting for the economic cycle, the Treasury estimates that structural deficit equivalent to about 1.5% of gross domestic product this financial year. Structural deficits are obviously not sustainable in the long term. They lead to ever-increasing debt and higher interest costs. So that I believe that the government has no choice but to act to reduce that deficit. And our opponents also know that. They were receiving the same advice from officials. They just chose to pay lip service to the notion of fiscal responsibility and to leave it to someone else to make the tough decisions. Well, managing within future allowances of $2.4 billion will be challenging. It's also essential. And I'm advised that if we were to stick to the larger operating allowances planned by the outgoing government, then the country's finances would remain in deficit until 2031. And that would be an irresponsible path. So our government is restoring the balance between government revenue and spending. And what that means is that savings and reprioritisation will be a feature of our budgets. Overall, the lower allowances for our budgets between 24 and 27 result in a cumulative total improvement of approximately $5.5 billion across the forecast period compared to what we inherited in the half-year update. And the budget update forecasts that improvement contributes to a $1.5 billion surplus in the 27-28 financial year. So all of this puts us on track to achieve the first of the 3 goals the government has set itself to get the Crown's books back in order. Those goals are to get back to surplus in 27-28, to reduce net core Crown debt to between 20% and 40% of GDP, and to reduce core Crown expenses towards 30% of GDP. Now, I would like to achieve those goals faster than the projections currently show. But the government is not planning an aggressive fiscal consolidation. Instead, we are taking a deliberate, medium-term approach, and we will not overreact to movements up or down in the forecasts. We will be making difficult decisions and trade-offs to turn the fiscal situation around, to get back to surplus and reduce debt. But I am determined that we will also look after New Zealanders on the way through. And in terms of the context of the budget, there are 2 things I do want to highlight in that regard: tax relief and greater investment in frontline services. Our government was elected to give a fairer deal to hard-working New Zealanders, and our tax package announced yesterday delivers on that promise. The tax package, which I understand will have just about become law in Parliament, being debated as I'm here, will ensure that average income households will be up to $102 a fortnight better off from 31 July. Some households with children and early childhood education will benefit by up to $250 a week. Not every household will get that much, but overall, 94% of households will benefit from our tax package. And the package adjusts the bottom 3 tax thresholds, extends eligibility for the independent earner tax credit, increases the in-work tax credit, lifts the minimum family tax credit to ensure work pays, and introduces the family boost payment for families with children in early childhood education. Adjusting the lowest tax threshold reduces income tax for everyone earning more than $14,000 a year. The other changes unashamedly tilt the benefits of the package towards low to middle income families with children, those who have been hardest hit by rising prices. An analysis from the Treasury shows that an estimated 727,000 households will benefit by at least $75 a fortnight, and 187,000 will benefit by at least $100 a fortnight. On average, households will benefit by $60 a fortnight, and households with children by $78 a fortnight. The 31 July implementation date gives employers and payroll providers time to make necessary changes. And the package is fully funded, so it won't add to inflation pressures. I'll share with you that I took some delight sharing how we are funding dollar for dollar our tax package in our official Treasury documents yesterday. The thousands of words of columns debate about whether or not we could fund it were disproven in one emphatic swipe yesterday, and I enjoyed that very much. I also enjoy the fact that our tax package is not only fiscally neutral over 4 years, but in its first 2 years actually delivers more savings than it puts out tax relief, which makes it particularly responsible from an inflationary perspective. So people can see how much they will benefit from the tax changes by using the tax calculator at the budget website. And I'm advised that the calculator has gone gangbusters. By 8 o'clock this morning, there had been more than 240,000 individual visits to the official tax relief calculator on the Treasury website. 250,000 New Zealanders. And that, of course, is just the official calculator. There are some unofficial, unreliable calculators out there as well. But to give you a sense of what those numbers represent, I'm advised that in the first 2 days after last year's budget, so 48 hours compared to our 18, there were actually only 17,500 visits to the budget website. So, look, I share those numbers because they accord with the feedback from everyday New Zealanders that I have been getting and that our MPs have been receiving for months. I acknowledge that for some of the people in this room, tax relief may not be essential to you balancing your budget, but for many New Zealanders it will be. I enjoyed getting a message from a pukikoe grower overnight who emailed me to tell me, quote, "We appreciate the fact that our hard-working staff will be getting more in their pay packet each payday." And I think that sentiment is well shared by many employers. I also noted the single mother on last night's news who said of the additional $90 a fortnight she will receive, "I feel like it's really good. It helps a lot." Even from opposition, I note that the Labour Party have got a newfound interest in tax relief, having written to their supporters today to ask them to donate that tax relief to them. This may seem particularly cheeky and somewhat hypocritical given their opposition to tax relief, but I think it's utterly consistent with the Labour Party's view that they can always spend their money better than you can. Look, the other aspect of the budget that most clearly indicates how we are doing things differently is our real focus on getting value for money. Now, I know that this is something you do in your businesses and your workplaces, day to day, week to week, month to month, but it's something government has to get a lot better at. And I think it's escaped the notice of some commentators. The biggest part of our budget on a dollar for dollar analysis is not in fact tax relief. In fact, it is investment in frontline public services. Those services I referred to earlier: hospitals, primary health care, schools, teacher education, extra police officers, prison officers, and more prison cells to keep the public safe. 2/3 of the new spending in Budget 2024 goes to those three areas: health, education, and law and order. And how have we achieved that? Well, ministers and their departments have gone line by line through all of the spending areas they are responsible for. We knew that we would have a tight operating allowance and we would need to find ways to do more with less. And that scrutiny has resulted in more than 240 individual savings initiatives. Some amount to a few $100,000 a year, others save tens of millions. Some reduce the amount of funding available for a particular activity, while others involve stopping an activity altogether. So I do want to just touch now on our government's approach to living within our means on an ongoing basis so that we can reduce the debt burden. Because as I said earlier, this approach of lower operating allowances will require us to drive more value from our spending. And for us, that means carefully evaluating not just the perennial bids for new spending, but looking deeper at the approximately $140 billion worth of spending we're already doing. And in this budget, we demonstrated the scope for reprioritisation. In just 6 months, our government found $5.9 billion of average annual savings and revenue. That is $23 billion over the next 4 years that is now available to fund more pressing priorities. And if that's what we found in 6 months, we remain convinced that there is more to be found so that we can fund the frontline services New Zealanders rely on. The new revenue and savings measures in our budget include $586 million from investing in tax compliance to support the fairness and integrity of our tax system, $290 million from repealing Labour's Three Waters program, and $63 million in consultant and contractor savings at one government agency, the Ministry of Social Development. If there are consultants in the room, I will be upfront with you. Government will be spending a lot less money on consultants in the next few years, but here's the thing, the private sector needs you to innovate and to grow. There will be $3.71 billion worth of those savings directed to tax relief and $2.15 billion of those savings redirected to frontline services. So in summary, this year's budget is the clean-up job that New Zealand needs after 6 years of economic mismanagement. It heralds a new era of careful government spending, lower taxes for hard-working New Zealanders, and a strong focus on rebuilding the economy. And I'm conscious that almost all of the challenges that New Zealand faces now will be made much easier if we drive economic growth. That is what we must strive for. And there is much more to do, and our policy agenda as a government is resolutely focused on supporting growth and removing barriers to innovation, to investment and employment. What this budget shows is how much more is possible with care and discipline. And we believe our approach means New Zealanders can now look forward with confidence, knowing that the government backs them, we're getting the finances under control, and we are establishing the foundations for productive growth. Thank you.
We've now got probably about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. If anyone's got any questions for the Minister, we'd love to have them.
Tim.
Congratulations on the budget, and congratulations on the tax cuts. You may not be aware of this, but you will soon will be, but we increased your rates yesterday. And in fact, I would guess that probably on average, given the price of or the value of the houses that most of the people in this room probably live in, most people are going to be paying more in rates next year than they will be getting by way of tax cuts. And rates are a real problem. I mean, and I'm just wondering whether you would consider taking a more integrated approach towards looking at how local government funds, because we've got this one appalling instrument called rates, and we would like to actually change the model. And in particular, we would like to avoid having to pay GST on our rates. But have you given any thought to anything we could do to actually lower the rates burden?
Well, look, I've got two messages for you, Tim, and I want to acknowledge Tim's role on Wellington City Council. I think we are fortunate to have councillors of your experience and background. The first message is a cooperative and warm message, and the second message is a bit of a hard message. So let's start with the warmth. The warmth is this, which is that our government is very keen to work closely with local government on the significant infrastructure challenges that you face. In particular, as you know, we are working on the local water done well model to ensure that you are better able to fund and plan for water assets over the longer term. And we think that's critically important, both for investing in those assets, but also freeing up your balance sheets for other infrastructure activity. We also have a commitment in our coalition agreements to ensuring that you get some of the upside from housing growth and development. And we are developing policy to ensure that that can be an additional source of revenue for local government. We want to do city deals whereby we work with cities like Wellington to find where are the requirements for infrastructure and growth over the next few years. What is government's role? What is local government's role? How can we work together to deliver those longer-term infrastructure pipelines? So that's the positive news. My hard message is this, because it's raised with me by ratepayers all over the country. They say to me, Nicola, it's great that the government is going line by line through its spending. When's local government going to do the same thing? And so I'd put to you that I think ratepayers are right to expect that every council around the country should hold itself to the same financial discipline that ratepayers themselves have to in their own households.
Thank you, Nicola. It was a really interesting and great sort of budget. I have a quick question around something at the start. You mentioned that Pharmac needs an extra $1 billion, roughly, to fund the drugs that it's desperately wanting to fund. Has there been any analysis on what the direct costs and indirect cost savings would be if those drugs were funded?
Well, look, funding medicines well is essential. We know that when we fund medicines well, we have less pressure on the health system as a whole. I think the Pharmac model generally serves us pretty well in New Zealand. It gets us good prices for pharmaceuticals, and we are, as a government, determined to ensure that New Zealanders get better access to medicine in the future, and we will be making investments to ensure that they do. There are some challenges to the Pharmac model, though. We want to see more cancer patients getting cancer drugs, and under the current Pharmac model, they would have to wait a long time for that. So we are working determinedly on policy to deliver on our commitment to ensure those cancer drugs are funded sooner, and you will see us making that a very high priority in the next little bit. I think everyone's shy because the cameras are on. Here we are.
Kia ora, Nicola, Louise here, and congratulations on your budget and your mihi too. I thought was particularly lovely to hear. I have two questions if I can, so I'll try and make them succinct. They're completely unrelated. So the first is, what is the government's sort of approach, and what are you thinking about in terms of levers to drive demand-side electrification? You've got sort of fast track for renewable energy projects, but how do you sort of help ensure that there's the demand side's there to justify the projects? And secondly, working for families is hugely complex. I know someone at the IRD that says it's the most rework that they have to do is for working for families, and it has. We've seen some commentating on the huge abatement rate as people's salaries rise and they get very, very punitive tax sort of abatement. Is that something that you're looking at, and it's something that you might explore in the future to do more efficiently with better incentive structures?
Yeah, well, taking each of those two very good questions. On the first one, in terms of emission reduction, we see electrification as a key tool for ensuring that we've got less emissions from transport in particular, but also from industrial energy. And so we see ourselves as having a couple of roles there. First, we need to make sure that the emissions trading market is functioning effectively to price emissions across the economy, and we intend for the emissions trading scheme to remain at the centre of our emission reduction activity. But secondly, we do think there is a role for government where the market isn't operating perfectly. So a good example of that is we are investing in an electric car charging network. And that addresses the fact that when you ask New Zealanders what's putting them off buying an electric car, many of them will say that they have range anxiety, they worry there aren't enough chargers. So we think there's a strong case for government investment there. And we've pledged that as a government, on a investment by investment, project by project basis, where we see initiatives that stack up from an emission reduction and value for money perspective, we're prepared to make those investments. To the second part of your question about working for families, look, you're right, the system is complex. The good news is that once someone has registered for working for families, that complexity happens behind the door from their perspective. They simply see the income that results. Our key focus when it comes to the welfare and tax system is ensuring that people face really good incentives to move off welfare and into work. We need to make sure that work pays. And so that's why you saw in our tax package released yesterday an increase to the minimum family tax credit. And the reason I'm saying this is there's some irony here, which is sometimes in order to provide those clear work incentives, some complexity is required to ensure that the tax system is properly rewarding that extra effort. So it is something we keep a watch on, it is something that I'm interested in, and as I say, we're guided by that need to make work pay.
Afternoon. Just a question in regards to climate change. I didn't hear the word a single time, neither today nor yesterday, greatly. I might have not heard everything, but I just wouldn't mind sort of been informed that the national determined contribution to keep with in the Paris limits or achieving them has created a budget hole anywhere between $3 and $30 billion, and I just wonder how that one will be filled by the year 2030.
Well, look, the nationally determined contribution, you're right, the range of assessment of what that could cost New Zealand is significant. It's been noted as a fiscal risk by the Treasury over successive budgets. We, as a government, believe that it is important that we continue to reduce emissions. We've signed up to the Zero Carbon Act and the emission reduction budgets that are required within it. New Zealand's on track to meet that first emission reduction budget, that first 5-year period. So the question is what we do for the second and third periods. This is something our government is giving a lot of thought to, and we intend to be consulting on our plan for emission reduction period 2 later this year.
Mm-hmm. Assuming that central government does budgets which are not for 1 year, rather for 5 or 10 years, like the local government sector does, I would imagine that these costs have been already accounted for?
Look, we follow the international requirements for accounting, and the advice from Treasury is that it shouldn't be treated as a liability according to their measurements. This is advice that has been through the pressure cooker of James Shaw and Grant Robertson over several years. I've reviewed that advice and I'm satisfied that Treasury are accounting for that properly.
Nicola, hi, Jeremy Smith. First of all, thank you for hosting this thing on a Friday, because there's at least a few business people in town on a Friday. So I do encourage you all to go and frequent your local pubs and restaurants after this to generate a bit of income.
Yeah.
And I do hope that you do come back to work more often.
Good use for your tax relief.
Yeah, absolutely. And my question is, I've just got my insurance bill this afternoon and this morning. And it's frightening, and we're reaching a point where we cannot really afford to pay the insurance. Are there any plans at a national level to look at trying to address this ongoing problem?
Well, look, this is something as a Wellingtonian I'm very conscious of. The decision by insurance companies to move to risk-based pricing, I think, is understandable. That they would request higher premiums from those who pose a bigger insurance risk than others. And what we've seen in recent years is a reassessment of some of the risk that New Zealand faces. And I think about this particularly from a climate adaptation perspective, because I think there is quite an important role for central government in mitigating some of those risks. In particular, we are thinking about natural hazard regulation in terms of where local government and others are building and the requirements that they are required to meet. But the other part of it is also what we do to make sure our communities are more resilient to flooding and extreme weather events. One of the investments that hasn't been heralded as much as I would like it to be in yesterday's budget is that the first sheaf of investments out of the Regional Infrastructure Fund will be flood protection schemes across the country, because we think that building those stop banks, building those flood protection schemes is actually very important in terms of ensuring communities are more resilient to those risks. Because the reality is, if local government doesn't keep up with those challenges, insurance premiums will climb a lot faster. So we are determined to do our bit. Thank you.
Thank you for all those questions, and thank you, Minister. We have now got ANZ New Zealand's Chief Economist Sharon Zollner here to give her analysis of the budget. Many of you will have seen her over the years in the media. She was with Jack Tame, the two Shazzers, with Jack Tame yesterday.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to take your questions.
So you have to make a correction today in regards to the number of families that will get a full $250 tax cuts. Is it greater or fewer than 3,000?
We think it'll be fewer than 3,000.
Do you have any ballpark numbers? Is it between 2,000 and 3,000, around 1,500? Where are we looking?
Well, you can imagine it's a number I've been very interested in. It's very difficult for the Treasury and IRD to model. So the best estimate they have been able to give me is that they think it is fewer than 3,000. What we know for sure is that more than 19,000 households will get more than $200 a fortnight. What we also know for sure is around 21,000 households will benefit for the full $150 family boost. Beyond that, this is simply an issue to do with the challenges of modelling.
That is a broken promise.
Why it is so hard to model that?
Because it requires us to predict what incomes people will have, how much they will spend on childcare, and to predict that into the future.
That is a broken promise, isn't it?
Absolutely not. The commitment we made has been kept. We committed to make tax changes that are exactly the tax changes that we have ended up putting into law. What we also said was that families would benefit by up to $250 per fortnight. We've kept that commitment.
3,000 families would be eligible for the full 250.
We never made that commitment. I really wish to correct you on that, because what we were asked late in the campaign was how many families we thought might benefit from that. There was another commentator who produced that number. We thought, based on our analysis in opposition, it sounded about right. And we were very upfront that it is very difficult to model. The fact that we weren't able to model that in opposition, I think, is fair, particularly given even in government with the resources of the IRD and the Treasury. It's a very challenging number to model. I think what is really important is the tax policy that we campaigned on is the tax policy we have delivered.
Do you regret rolling the family boost into your wider tax policy marketing? Only 4% of households will get it, and yet you're marketing your tax policy at 90% of households will get some tax relief.
No, because I'm proud that we have intentionally targeted tax relief at those who need it most, families with young children. A big part of what we're doing in our tax plan is ensuring that where families have big childcare costs, they can get some offset for that. I think it's a great policy. It's going to mean that families with young children, I think many will feel more able to work more hours, and will feel that they're getting a fairer deal.
The criticism is that you're having it both ways by targeting the policy so that fiscally the impact of the policy is cheaper, and marketing it as if everyone gets a large amount of money. You can't have it both ways, either expensive and targeted or cheap and minuscule.
Look, I was so consistent through the campaign. Again and again, I said, go to the tax calculator. And the reason I said that was we've always been upfront that people's circumstances and therefore the tax relief they are owed varies considerably. We encouraged people to go to the tax calculator then, and I'm encouraging people to go to the tax calculator now. I think we were really upfront that was the maximum that people could get. Interestingly, the upside that we've also learned with the value of IRD and Treasury modelling is that some families will in fact get more than that.
What do you make about the Tim Brown question? There was another question about insurance, rates of insurance. We're getting to the... And another announcement today, I think the Commerce Commission giving transparent approval to raise transmission prices, $15 a cycle. You're getting to the point in the inflation cycle where you can't do much about those prices. That's going to really hurt the Reserve Bank and its ability to solve this issue for you. What do you do about it?
Well, we're doing what we can, and that's about having responsible spending plans of our own, and you've seen us deliver that in our budget, a more contractionary fiscal policy. It is also about doing what we can to keep pressure off rents, and you've seen us do that with our policy for rental properties. It's about us doing what we can to ensure that local government can fund assets into the future, and you've seen that with our deal with Watercare. So there are things that we can do at the margin, and we're doing those things. ultimately inflation and the level it's at is the responsibility of the Reserve Bank.
You must be concerned that insurance price rises, rates rises, and things like transmission prices. There's going to be a lot of investment in electricity generation and transmission in the next few years. That is going to hamper the Reserve Bank's effort to bring inflation into target.
Oh, look, I want to see the cost of living cheaper for all New Zealanders, and that means getting inflation under control. Of course, I want that.
Minister, what concerns have you heard? What concerns have you heard from the business community, particularly here in Wellington, about the impact of the public sector job losses and what that might be like for businesses here in Wellington?
Well, look, I've had a lot of business people say to me that they think it's about time that the government looked at tidying up its own financial shop, that they think it's about time that the government gave some care and rigour to the way it spends. I think it would be wrong for us to lean back and allow for the extensive growth that's occurred in the public sector to go unchecked. We campaigned on a commitment to move resources from the back office to the front line, and we're doing that.
So you're not concerned about how those redundancies could impact the local economy?
Well, my view is that many of those people are skilled, will find new jobs, and I want to see Wellington growing, not just through growing government departments. It's not a great future. Wellington's future should involve private enterprise, innovators, entrepreneurs, businesses growing as well.
Minister, those jobs won't be available immediately. Those jobs won't be available immediately. The jobs they will get will be in Auckland, if not Australia, if not Canada. Wellington's a small and already shrinking city. It's really not coming at a good time. Have you modelled out the sort of impacts that it might have on Wellington at all? And is there anything you could step in to do to give Wellington a little boost?
Oh, well, look, we provisioned in the budget for significant investment in the film sector, and I reckon Wellington will benefit from that.
Minister, in the RIS with the personal income tax changes, it said that basically about 9,000 households might be marginally worse off because of the interaction between, I think, part benefits and thing. A, do you plan to do anything for those 9,000 households? And B, I think in the fact sheet yesterday it said 200, so I was just wondering the discrepancy between those numbers.
They're two separate issues, and this is quite technical, so please bear with me. The first issue that we articulated in the fact sheet relating to around 200 households is one that actually didn't come through to us in the policy advice. It was only uncovered when we developed the tax calculator, and what that showed is in that very extremely small range of circumstances, there are some people for whom our changes mean the interaction between the independent earner credit and their working for families means that they could stand to lose out. I've asked officials to immediately come up with options for me for fixing that, and we're pretty confident we'll be able to do that. The second issue that you are asking about is a long-standing issue relating to beneficiaries' income. I want to assure all beneficiaries that there will be no reduction in the benefit that you are owed, and in fact your benefit will continue to rise in line with inflation. In fact, what this relates to is some circumstances, very limited, where people could be, if they had a benefit for part of the year, then worked full-time for another part of the year, that they could in some circumstances be eligible for a tax refund. What this change means is that in some circumstances the value of that tax refund could change by $1 or $2 a week. This is a long-standing issue that has existed in the tax system for some time.
Minister, the Labour Party has put out an email to its supporters asking for them to send their tax cuts to the Labour Party. What do you make of that?
Well, some things never change. The Labour Party always thinks it can spend New Zealanders' money better than they can. And actually, New Zealanders deserve that cash. Labour stripped it from them for years, didn't create value for them, and I think it's pretty cheeky to now ask them to give it to them again. And this is the same party, of course, that is opposing tax relief, and yet they want to use it to fluff their coffers, and I think that's pretty hypocritical.
Chris Hipkins has sort of dug down. When I just spoke to him before, he said it's not hypocritical and he's not embarrassed by it. What do you make of that?
Well, I obviously take a very different view. I think that New Zealanders who've gone through a cost of living crisis that the Labour Party helped create deserve to keep more of their own money. And I think that it is pretty cheeky for the Labour Party to hold a view that they deserve that money more than hard-working people do.
It's frustrating that you're
Minister, there were a lot of savings in the budget yesterday around data and insights. How does that marry up with your social investment promise?
Well, we put a significant investment in to enable social investment in the budget. There's $50 million there. And what we see across government is actually there's a lot of data that's collected. It's how it's used that counts. And social investment is not just about collecting data for data's sake. It's about getting the insights and acting on them.
So are you confident that the efficiencies that have been found around data and insights teams will not compromise the quality of data that the Social Investment Agency now has to work with?
Yes.
Can I ask about the Tiwai Point deal? Can you rule out any government subsidies or bailouts if Tiwai Point decides to threaten to leave again?
Well, look, because of the arrangement that's been sealed today, that won't be necessary.
And how does this arrangement help our fragile electricity network?
Well, what it ensures is that this major customer is confirmed, and so that gives the electricity generators the ability to plan for the future with some certainty. I'd also note that Tiwai is a source of really important employment and export for that region, so it's positive to see them continuing to be in New Zealand.
The worse than expected economic climate has already proven really problematic for the government. There's every chance that it will continue to deteriorate more than expected. So what's the plan for if that happens? What's going to give?
Well, look, obviously we've put together a budget that is our view of what the prudent course is to take. We don't control the forecasts. What we need to do is set a steady course. I think we've done that with the budget, and our plan, as I said today, is to do what we can to give businesses the confidence they need to invest, because it's when businesses are investing, when they're employing, that our economy will grow again, and that's fundamentally what's needed.
Sure, the economists I've talked to have said the risks are to the downside. So if there is less GDP growth, there is less tax revenue, are you going to cut spending more, introduce new revenue generation methods, or keep pushing out the, return to surplus? Like if something's going to have to give, if that scenario eventuates, which is not out of the realms of possibility.
Well, look, as I said today, we've set out a budget that we think provides a steady course. We're not going to overreact to any changes in forecasts. We're committed to getting more disciplined spending over the next few years, but we also think it's important New Zealanders have the confidence that we're going to stick with them. And I want New Zealanders to know that we are going to be keeping that social safety net going, keeping investment in health and education going, and that we can do that while also getting the books back in order.
You cancelled the Science City as pledged to do funding. Have you had any interim reports back from the Gluckman reviews into what might replace that science funding?
Look, not as yet. As you know, the government makes a significant investment in research and science, and our job as a government is to make more of that investment, in particular to make sure it's better connected with the needs of our industries and firms so that they are commercialising that work that the government does. And the work that Professor Gluckman is leading is an important part of that.
So he was pretty worried that the National Science Challenges funding, I think that ends 30 June this year, and Science City was meant to sort of pick up where that left off. Now that's gone. There's sort of nothing there to fill that hole. Is that, what's going to happen on 1 July when the CRIs and other private science entities have nothing to bid for?
Well, there'll continue to be hundreds of millions of government money going into science, and research, both through the R&D tax credit, which rewards the private sector for investing in research and science, but also through the government's ongoing investment in Crown Research Institutes and in tertiary education institutions.
So you think it was appropriate for Adrian Orr to write to the CEOs of the major banks and also run a letter in the Herald criticising the banks for supporting the New Zealand initiative, which opposes the Reserve Bank's capital rules? He sort of, I don't know if you've seen the letter, it's sort of colourfully worded. He's been criticised for that. Is that sort of thing appropriate?
I don't think that's a matter for me to comment on. That's a matter for the Reserve Bank Board.
I mean, it is a matter for the credibility. It's a very powerful position, and the credibility for New Zealand. And is that a good look for us?
I think this is exactly why the employment of the Reserve Bank Governor is independent of the Minister of Finance. His employment is a matter for the Reserve Bank Board and its chair.
Do you think the Reserve Bank Board doesn't have to hold him to account?
That is a matter for the Reserve Bank Board.
Is the reason why this is a matter for the Reserve Bank Board? Because if you did intervene, you would say it's pretty inappropriate.
I have been in receipt of a letter to both me and the Chair of the Reserve Bank Board, and I have reiterated to the Chair of the Reserve Bank Board that it's my expectation that the Reserve Bank Board take responsibility for all employment matters. I do not view those as matters that I am responsible for.
What was the letter that you received?
That is a letter of complaint from the New Zealand Initiative.
Right, and you've decided that it's the Reserve Bank's board job to respond to that letter, not you?
I will respond to that letter simply highlighting that the way the independence of the Reserve Bank works is that it is not appropriate for me to be involved in those matters. That is a matter for the Reserve Bank Board.
So you've received the letter, then what did you tell the Reserve Bank Board?
I simply called the Chair of the Reserve Bank. I noted that we had both received the same letter alleging breaches of the Code of Conduct, and I reiterated to him that if I was asked about that, I would view that as a matter for him and not for me.
Coming back to that $3,000, the reason I ask about whether it's, 3,000 households, the reason I ask is when you were asked in the lockup yesterday, you said that the number of would be greater. So was that a faux pas on your part?
Yes, it was, and I corrected that with the journalist who asked me the question. I got tied up in the numbers around the more than 200, and that was a misspeak.
And listening to Sharon Zollner earlier, I mean, things are going to be gloomy for a while yet. Are you feeling daunted in your role as Finance Minister?
No, I'm actually feeling really confident today, and I want New Zealanders to feel that too, because in 6 months I think we've done a really great job with this budget. We've shown that savings are possible, we've shown that tax relief is possible, and we're doing that while investing in public services. You know, I think the positive story in the forecast yesterday is that inflation's coming under control. That means interest rates can come down, growth is recovering. I think the future is going to be great for New Zealand, and I am pleased that I'm playing my role in that economic recovery.
Do you think New Zealanders share in that confidence with you?
Well, I think right now things are really tough. You know, inflation's been high for a long time, interest rates are high, things are very challenging. And so our job as a government, we can't go back in time to stop the big COVID party. We're dealing with the hangover, we're doing the clean-up job, and I think we're doing a good job of it.
Minister, even at the end of your forecast period, after your fiscal consolidation, government spending as a percentage of GDP will still be 30% or higher. That's more than it was even under Grant Robinson. Is there a reason structurally our economy needs a higher percentage of government spending? Well, why is that number as a percentage of GDP going to be higher in the future? Has something changed in the New Zealand economy?
Yeah, well, look, the big thing that's changed, and as Sharon Zollner and I both pointed out today, is that the expectations for the size of our economy have reduced. Economists have looked at the size of the downturn. It was longer, deeper, and is now more persistent than they had thought, and that means the productive output of the New Zealand economy has reduced. And therefore, as a proportion of the economy, the government looks bigger. So what can we do about that? Well, one, yes, we need to bring ongoing restraint to government spending. But the second part of the equation that is critically important is we have to faster grow the economy. We're not sitting back as a government and just accepting those low forecasts for growth. We're doing everything we can to drive more productivity, more growth, so that the economy is larger in the future.
Are you sort of philosophically still committed to around 30% of GDP or lower?
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you.